Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarad Tene Brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah Tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatratra sargo mrisha Dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukadamritadrava sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. So we now enter the 9th chapter of the 7th Skandha of Bhagavatam. We are in the glorious Prahlada Charitram, and we have witnessed the most auspicious descent appearance of Lord Narasimha and how he killed Hiranyakashipu the demon, who represents the tendency of the ego as well to engage in power, lust, and greed. And we also saw how he made all kinds of plans by asking boons for Brahma to be not killed in many ways. And yet, while all those boons were kept intact, yet he was killed by Narasimha by making sure he was not killed by a weapon but by nails, not on day or night but at dusk, not inside or outside but at the entrance, not on earth or air but on the thighs of Lord Narasimha, and so on. So this also represents how the ego makes very clever plans, thinking that it can outlast the inevitable march of time, and yet always, invariably, time comes back in some way and finishes it off, and that's what the story represents as well symbolically. And the literal story is, of course, very beautiful too. In fact, there is this place in South India called Ahobila, where this literal event, this descent of Narasimha, is supposed to have happened. So, all these divine events are both literally and symbolically true. One doesn't have to take only one or the other. It is said that it was happening. It was a happening that was many years ago in this region, in a different era altogether. One cannot validate it in any way, but regardless, the symbolic meaning is of great relevance to us, and also the very devotion that it evokes, just the form of Narasimha and the fierce grace that comes through him is something that is available forever. So now Narada continues that after all the demigods and also Brahma and Shiva himself, though they glorified and pacified him, he was not rid of his anger. As we mentioned toward the end, this very anger is to bring out the glory of Prahlada. So it is said that finally the consort of the Lord, who is Sri or Lakshmi, was sent to please the Lord, but even she dared not go near him. Such was the fierce rage that Nrasimha was exhibiting. Finally, it occurred to Brahma that we can only send Prahlad, because it was Prahlad that invoked Nrasimha to appear. So he says, go and pacify the Lord, because you can alone do it. So Prahlad, who was standing there watching all this, he accepts it by saying, so be it. And he goes and directly falls prostrate on the floor, bowing down with his body on the ground and palms joined together like a stick. He's on the ground. And with compassion on seeing the little boy fallen at the soles of his feet, the Lord placed his lotus hand upon his head, it is said, and asked him to get up. And by the very touch of his lotus hand, Prahlad was filled with immense grace, and it is said that he could have direct knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. It is said Paratma Darshanaha. He was able to, he is already a Mahabhagavata, supreme devotee, and now he was filled with direct wisdom of the Supreme Spirit, instantly revealed to him. Prahlad was supremely gratified with hair standing on end, love and tears of joy in his eyes. And with that, it is said that he composed a beautiful prayer and glorified Sri Hari right there. And this is one of the most beautiful glorifications of the Lord among so many that comes in Bhagavatam. It's called Stuti. Stuti is to glorify the Lord, and every Stuti in Bhagavatam has both glorification as well as teachings for all of us. And among all the beautiful ones, this stands out. So exquisite. Prahlad covers the entire gamut of spiritual wisdom through these prayers. He begins by saying that Brahma himself, all the great rishis, all the great sages, even they have not been able to successfully glorify you, O Lord Sri Hari. How can I, who is born in a demon race, ever hope to propitiate you? Because he says all the qualities that men value in this world, he lists 12 of them. These 12 are wealth, lineage, beauty, asceticism, learning, and keenness of intellect, splendor, glory, and bodily strength, self endeavor, that is putting effort, intelligence, and yoga, that is the ability to control the breath and the mind. So, all these 12 are normally valued very highly by people, but Prahlad says none of this is sufficient to truly glorify you, whereas he says a mere elephant was able to glorify you. So, this refers to the story of Gajendra Moksha, which comes in the 8th skandha. Next skandha, we will see this beautiful story of an elephant which is surrendered to the Lord and glorifies Him. So Prahlad says, it is the heart that matters and not all these things, wealth and lineage and beauty and even one's austerities and learning and strength and even yoga, none of this matters. So Prahlad says, even a illiterate or a chandala, it is called, one who is completely living in very dirty ways, or it is said that normally they eat the flesh of dogs and so on. He says, even such a person, if he has somehow been able to dedicate his mind, speech, and actions to you, he is far greater than a very learned man who has got all the 12 qualities we just saw, because this surrender from this most illiterate person is purifying himself and his whole clan, whereas the one who is very learned, if he is full of arrogance due to that learning, he himself is unable to save himself, let alone his clan. Therefore, he says, any prayer to you is only for our own good, it is not for you, because he beautifully gives the example of, if one has to decorate the image in the mirror, we cannot decorate the image in the mirror. If we decorate the face and then we look at the mirror, automatically the image in the mirror is decorated. Similarly, he says, if we glorify you, we are automatically pleased because you are the source and we are like the reflection in the mirror. And therefore, we cannot, if we try to please ourselves, it is as foolish as Prahlad beautifully says, uh, decorating the image in the mirror. It is of no value. Instead, if we glorify you, automatically we are pleased and we are also glorified, just as the image is decorated by decorating the face. So he says, I have no fear to approach you because I am able to recognize that to celebrate with all my being and to the best of my understanding is the best way to purify myself and purify everyone. He says, therefore, there is no fear for me. He says, in addition, what is there to fear? Because even a mean fellow, even the most fallen, sinful person who has fallen into mundane existence and is caught in ignorance, he is purified undoubtedly by glorifying you. And therefore, he says, even though all these great demigods and Brahma himself are all afraid of you, I have no fear. Also, he says, the Almighty Lord that you are, all your sports as these descents are for the well being and the prosperity of the world. So Prahlad beautifully says that even though your form is fierce looking, it is actually benevolent, full of grace, and therefore I see that benevolence in your face, in your descent, and it is conducive for everyone's well being, prosperity, and beatitude. He says, Kshemaya Bhutaya Utatma Sukhaya Chasya Vikriditam Bhagavato Ruchira Avataraihi. Your avatars, your descents are full of prosperity, well being, and conducive to beatitude. So, what is there to afraid? To be afraid. So, O Lord, he says, but be pleased to get rid of this anger, because this demon who put the world through suffering is gone, and the whole world is rejoicing, and therefore you can remove this anger, withdraw this anger. And also he says, anyway, this form that you have shown, it is called as Ugra Narasimha, that is the Narasimha who is fierce and angry. This form removes fear from people's hearts, it removes darkness from people's hearts, and people will remember this. He says, Sarve Rupam Narasimha Vibhayaya Janaha Smaranti. He says, people will recall this form of yours and be rid of fear. So, therefore, you don't need to retain this angry mood. You can become Shanta, you can become peaceful, because this form of you as Ugra Narasimha, fierce form, is registered forever in the hearts of people. And by recollecting this, they will get rid of darkness and therefore be free of fear as well. So he says, as for myself, I am not afraid of your frightful form, even though it looks so fierce, with a frightful tongue, with sharp nails, with fierce teeth, and with your manes full of blood, and your claws that have torn the enemy apart, and with your neck adorned by the garland of the intestine of this enemy of yours, which is my father, and your roar is terrifying all the quarters. With all of this, we can imagine how terrifying, how ugra this form is. But Prahlad says, that does not give me any fear, because I know that you are full of grace. You have only destroyed the darkness that my father was caught in. What I am actually afraid of is the terrible suffering involved in the cycle of birth and death, because people are caught in this fetters of desires, and caught in desires. They go from thought to thought, desire to desire, birth to birth, and therefore they are always suffering, and this is the real fear. And therefore I want you to call me to your lotus feet and keep me at your lotus feet, so that I never get back into that true fear, true suffering, which is to be constantly going from desire to desire, to chew what is already chewed, and always looking for trivial pleasures and getting caught in suffering. That is the real fear, not this terrific form of yours, which is actually grace. Because Prahlad says, I've been wandering through so many wombs, identified with so many bodies, so many forms of species, scorched with fire of grief, every time because of desire, and the desire not being satisfied, because of losing those I consider mine, and because of sickness, disease, so many forms of suffering I've been through so many wombs. And therefore, that suffering is what I need to be free of. Everyone needs to be free of. Now, with the rare privilege of seeing you and enjoying the fellowship of enlightened souls that have taken shelter in your lotus feet, thereby I can easily tide over all these obstacles, all these fears, by simply listening to your stories, O Narasimha. He says beautifully, Soham Priyasya Leela Katastava Nrsimha Virincha Gitaha. He says, I can simply listen to your Leelas, your sporting descent in this form, and thereby be free of this true fear, which is the fear of transmigration, fear of going from birth to birth, fear of constantly chasing desires. Therefore, he says, give me constant position at your lotus feet as your servant. He says, me vada me tava dasya yogam. He says it's a beautiful expression, dasya yogam, means to be united with you as your servant. Yoga means to be united. Dasya means to be a servant. He says, keep me ever as your servant at your lotus feet, so that I shall always adore you and thereby never forget you and thereby never get caught in worldly desires and fall into the true fear of transmigration, but ever be at your feet which are full of grace. Then Prahlad says beautifully, people think parents are protectors of children, people think medicines are remedies for sickness, people think a ship is the protection for a drowning person, but all these are only temporary. A parent can protect a child for some time, perhaps. Medicine can give some remedy. A vessel can protect a ship, that is, can protect a person for some time. But the true protector is you, the true medicine is you, the true ship to cross over the ocean of suffering is you. And therefore, O Lord, he says, everything that there is you alone. He says finally in the beautiful verse, finally in this section, then he continues with another set of prayers. He says, whatever one does, whichever way, however one does, with whatever motive one does, and whatever he produces out of it, whenever, wherever, everything is only prompted by your energy and it's done by you effectively. He says, Yasmin yato yarhi yena yasya yasmad yasmai yatha yaduta yas tava paraha parova akhilam bhavata swarupam. He says, everything, however done, whatever done, whenever done, wherever done, by whosoever done, is all effectively done by you because it's all because of your energy. Then he moves on to say that this Maya, which is Prakriti with the attributes of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and which is activated through time, which is the creative will of the cosmic being, the expansion, we have seen this before, as the Virat Rupa, the universal form, the cosmic being, which brings forth the cosmic intelligence and therefore the universal manifestation. He says this whole Maya of the cosmic being is exceedingly powerful to conquer because it's full of desires and it is constantly spinning with the wheel of 16 spokes. He says the 16 spokes of this wheel are the mind and the 10 senses, that is the senses of 5 senses of perception, the 5 senses of action, and then the 5 elements, along with them the mind, of course. So this makes it 16. So this 16 spoked wheel is constantly spinning and everybody is crushed by this wheel because this is so powerful. And therefore he says, only by surrendering unto you one can be freed of this cycle, this wheel of 16 spokes. Otherwise one is thrown under this wheel and getting crushed by it. Therefore he says, long life, riches, glory in heaven, things that people crave for, all of this was had by my father. I saw this personally, and yet he was finished off in no time. Therefore, I do not covet anything, he says. I do not covet long life. I do not covet wealth, glory, sensuous pleasures, anything, not even mystic yogic powers. All I need is a place by your side, by the side of your servants. It's such a beautiful verse again. Prahlad says, Ayuhu Shriyam Vibhavam Aindriyam. None of this. Ayuhu is long life, wealth, glory, sensual pleasures. I want nothing. Na ichchami. Then he says, Upanaya mam nija britya parshvam. He says Upanaya means to take me. Upanayanam is, that's why the sacred event that is done normally to take a young boy towards wisdom. And so Prahlad says here, Upanaya, O Lord, take me to keep me by the side of your servants. Bhritya Parshvam. He says, keep me next to your servants. And then Prahlad continues, because everything else, all the enjoyments of this world, which people find so pleasant to hear, which seem tantalizing, are all unsubstantial. The very body with which people are wanting to enjoy these so called pleasures is so temporary. It's a hotbed of diseases. It is constantly in the process of decay. And yet, knowing all this, it is a surprise that people do not feel disgusted with them and they are constantly looking to quench the fire of desire with drops of honey. Prahlad's every single word throughout this whole sequence of episodes, first when he talks to his father, then he speaks to the demon boys, and now when he's directly glorifying the Lord Narasimha, every syllable, every word is so powerful. Here, so powerfully, he says, people are trying to quench the fire of desire with drops of honey. And for those drops of honey, they are in the fire of suffering. And yet, it is a wonder that people do not feel disgusted with them, he says, because this is what we see in the world. People are going after the same thing again and again. Prahlad already said this, punaf punaf charvita charvananam. He says, those who chew the thing that has already been chewed, and thereby they are always going through the same suffering for a small modicum of what they think is pleasure. So, this is what people are doing. In any case, Prahlad says, I find myself to be so undeserving of compassion because I am born in the demon race, and you have bestowed your grace on me, even though there is Brahma here, Shiva here, Lakshmi here, but you have bestowed your grace on me. And I know that your grace is always there for your devotees. He beautifully says here how to secure the grace of the Lord. He says, you are impartial to everyone. You are completely dispassionate, disinterested. That is to say, you are like the sun, which shines equally on everyone, and therefore you bestow grace on everyone. But the way to win that grace is to serve you. He says, there is no question of inferiority or superiority. It is just that one who serves you is able to secure your grace, which is ever present. It's a beautiful verse again. He says that whoever na brahmano na tu bhavasya navai ramayaha yen me arpita shirasi padmakaraf prasadaha. He first says, you have been so merciful to bestow your grace on me. Not even Brahma, Bhava, which is Shiva, or Rama, which is Lakshmi, they came near you, but you put your lotus hand on me. Then he says, Samsevaya surataroriva te prasadaha sevanurupam udayona paravaratvam. He says, only through service, Samsevaya, like the celestial wish shielding tree, surataroriva te prasadaha, your grace, Sevanurupa Mudayo, as one serves, one gets your grace. So, and how to serve, Prahlad already beautifully described this when he spoke to his father. He gave the 9 ways of serving the Lord, which is to listen to his stories, because this is very important to know. When we say serve the Supreme Being, how does one serve? Because it is not clear otherwise for many to engage in service. So they go about, the propensity to serve is very natural. So they either serve in some social causes, or they end up serving their own family attachments, or they serve their pets, or they serve somebody, because the serving propensity is very natural. But Prahlad has already detailed how to serve. He gave 9 ways, which is to listen to the names and the stories of the Lord, sing the glories of the Lord, Shravanam, Kirtanam. Then third is Smaranam, remember the Lord all the times. Fourth is Pada Sevanam, which is to serve the devotees of the Lord, those who have surrendered to Him, those who are full of compassion, those who are the true sages, those who are sharing the wisdom of the Lord. Essentially, those who are already at the lotus feet of the Lord, serving them. That's the fourth. Fifth is Archanam, which is to honor the symbols of the Lord, most important being the name. Vandanam, which is to offer one's physical respect by bowing down. Then Dasyam, which is to be a servant of everyone in this world, seeing that everyone is a manifestation of the Lord, and therefore to serve everyone with that consciousness that it is the Lord within that I am serving in every living entity. Sakyam, to be friendly with the Lord and with everyone. And finally, Atma Nivedanam, which is to surrender one's body, mind, and soul with no expectation, completely surrendering to the will of the Lord, accepting whatever is coming forth as perfectly ordained. So these are all the ways in which to serve. Prahlad already said this, and here he says, by this way of service, one wins your grace. Then he says, how can I, especially he refers to himself, afford to ever give up service of your devotees in particular? He says, because it is Narada, your devotee, who gave me this wisdom. I would have fallen into the deep well of demoniac living. So Prahlad, when he talks about this, it actually is applicable to everyone, because all the humans today are living like those demon boys, being pulled into the education system which is rooted in comparison and competition, and then a corporate world and the political world, economic world, everything is like the demoniac setup. So it is grace that alone pulls us out of that. And Prahlad says, it's Narada who gave us grace to pull me out of a sure life of demoniac existence. And therefore I am filled with gratitude to Narada, and I only want to serve your devotees because it's one of your devotees who saved me. And then he says, you have vindicated the words of your devotees all the time, just as now, when you vindicated my word and the words of all the sages by killing my father, because my father sought to challenge your very existence, and therefore you vindicated the words of your devotees. And so Prahlad continues by saying, it is you alone who constitute this entire universe. There is nothing other than you. He says, you are the only being before the creation came forth. You are the only being after dissolution. And even while universe is there, it is only you who appears as this universe. So this is the original teaching, the Chatushloki Bhagavatam that Krishna Narayana gave to Brahma. And Prahlad repeats here for us. He says, before the beginning, after the end, and all through the middle too, all there is only you. And it is only by your creative will, which is called Maya, that this universe has appeared. So you are the creator, preserver, and destroyer of this. The universe of cause and effects, therefore, is same as you, but you are not the same as the universe. So it's a very subtle, beautiful point. As the first verse of Bhagavatam, which we daily recite, it says that the universe is present as him, but he is separate from the universe. So Prahlad repeats the same thing. The example always, as we have seen, is the water in a mirage. So it is sunlight that causes the water in the mirage to appear. So the water in the mirage is sunlight, but sunlight is not the water. The sunlight is separate from the water. It remains independent of the appearance of water in a mirage. Or the other example given of a rope appearing as a snake in the night, the snake is there because of the rope, but the rope exists even when the snake is not perceived. So similarly, the Lord, the Supreme Being, pure Spirit, is ever present, and the universe is seen in Him as Him. And when the universe is not perceived, also He appears or He abides. And when the universe appears, it is Him that appears as the universe. So this is what Prahlad says, that the universe is you, but you are different from it. And therefore, the notion people have that one is mine and the other is other, that is the idea of I and mine, and then the others, us and them attitude. He says all this is so false, because when we recognize this, that the entire universe is you, it is you who is appearing as this universe. So all the living entities who are there, every one of them is your energy. It is your Jiva Shakti that appears as every living entity, and it is your Prakriti, that is the energy, the energy of matter, the material energy that appears as all the various bodies and the elements and so on. So everything there is you, and it is your Maya that makes people do whatever they do out of ignorance, and it is your grace that make people wake up. So the whole thing is you alone, and therefore When this is seen clearly, then it is ignorant to even have the notion that he is mine, he is not mine, and one is a friend, one is an enemy, and so on. Because Prahlad says, anything that originates from something, abides in something, and dissolves into that thing is the same as that. He says, Yad yasya janma nidhanam stitirikshanam chatadvai tadeva vasukalavat ashtitarvoho. So he says, just as a seed is identical with the tree effectively, because the tree comes forth from the seed, from the earth, and it dissolves back into the earth. Similarly, the whole universe comes forth from you, stays in you, and dissolves back into you, and therefore it is effectively you. So, the energy of the Supreme Being is what brings forth the universe, and the energy is non different from Him, and therefore everything there is your energy alone. So Prahlad says, you are able to therefore, when the right time comes, when the cosmic dissolution happens, dissolve everything into your being and abide in Yoga Nidra, which is the divine sleep, which is fully awake, wakeful sleep that is beyond the states of regular waking, dream, and deep sleep. And this very cosmos is therefore an embodiment of you, which is your energy alone. And so he says, when you are reposed in the causal waters, it is envisioned as the Supreme Lord lying down in the causal waters on the bed of the immortal Anantasesha. Then, when you decide to bring forth the next cycle of creation, just as the tree comes forth from a seed, from your own being, Prahlad says, the whole universe comes forth. And he describes this process, which we have seen before too, as to how first Brahma, the creative energy, comes forth from the Lord, from this supreme Satchit Ananda, pure being, and then Brahma brings forth the creation with the energy endowed by the supreme being. So he also recounts how Brahma first tried to find you and he was not able to find you, and later when he surrendered unto you, he was bestowed with the wisdom of your truth. So here Prahlad uses a beautiful example of how a sprout cannot go back to find the seed. So if a seed is put in the ground and the seed sprouts and the sprout comes out, can the sprout then go back into earth and discover the seed? It cannot. The sprout's very existence is because of the seed. Similarly, he says Brahma, the very creative energy itself, is like a sprout that comes forth from the seed, which is you. The source is you, and therefore, even he cannot find you. Nobody can find you as an object of knowledge, and therefore, only when completely one surrenders and recognizes that the very existence is because of you, it is your energy that is manifesting as creation, as every aspect of creation, animate and inanimate. When one recognizes that, then alone one can know you as the source of all and not through the process of gaining knowledge. So, Prahlad thereby speaks about the fact that true wisdom comes only through surrender and not through intellectual understanding. Just as we know that anything that is a part of a system cannot understand the whole system, an image on the screen cannot understand the whole screen. There are many examples. So, this way, Prahlad says it's only through surrendering completely that one can recognize that everything is sourced in you. Otherwise, one is constantly bewildered. Then Prahlad goes on to say, you took the form of Hayagriva. It's a very sacred form of the Lord. It is invoked for the purpose of learning too. So he says, you took the form of Hayagriva to destroy the modes of Rajas and Tamas in order to situate Brahma in Sattva and give him the Vedic texts so that he can bring forth creation in the right way. And then Prahlad also lists the various other beautiful avatars such as human forms of Ram and Balaram, beasts such as the divine boar Varaha, sages such as Narayana, the divine fish, and so on. So, as we notice here, Prahlad doesn't mention Krishna because Krishna is beyond the avatars themselves in the sense that he is Swayam Bhagavan. He is the original Narayana who descended as is, and therefore Krishna is a special category of his own, and all the various avatars are listed here. Then Prahlad finally says, regarding the mind of most people, Prahlad says, unfortunately, the mind though doesn't recognize all this because it is always only caught in lust and wickedness and sinful activities, fear and craving. Therefore, it is not finding delight in your stories. It is pulled by the various senses. He says, not gratified. The palate pulls in one direction, the sexual organ pulls in another direction, the stomach pulls in another direction, the sense of hearing pulls in another direction, the eyes pull in another direction. So Prahalad beautifully says, just as if a man is married to many women and each one is pulling him in a different direction, that is how the human being is, with every sense pulling him in different direction. And therefore all the foolish creatures unfortunately are fallen in the ocean of ignorance, afraid of death, constantly in suffering, going from birth to birth. And therefore Prahalad makes this finally beautiful prayer. He says, "O Lord Narasimha, please bestow your grace upon all these people, because who else can lift up these people who are caught in this?" Prahalad says, there is no exertion for you. You are grace personified, and therefore you can lift them up easily. It is these ignorant people for whom your grace is necessary. Prahalad, he is an embodiment of not just wisdom, not just devotion, but also compassion. And with great compassion, he says, please bestow your grace, even though they are undeserving, even though they do not engage in any devotional practices, and they are caught in suffering because of their attachment to cravings and desire and all other things. They really need your grace. So Prahalad says, please bestow your grace. This is the compassion of a true devotee who says, I am ready to not even come to Vaikuntha, come to the eternal abode, if it means so many others can get your grace. So he refers to the Lord here as Vaikuntha Natha, the Lord of Vaikuntha. He says, the Lord of the eternal abode, please bestow your grace on all these people, because it is the ignorant who deserve your grace. It is superfluous for those who are already serving you. So normally, as he already said, grace is bestowed on those who serve the Lord. But Prahlad, out of his compassion, says those who are serving you are already getting your grace, because one can serve you to begin with only by your grace, and therefore you bestow your grace on all these ignorant people so that they can also cross over. Because I am not afraid personally to cross this ocean of suffering, because I am already immersed in the glory of your being by your own grace. Therefore I lament for all the deluded beings of this world who are caught in this suffering. And then Prahalad beautifully says there are many who desire their own liberation and they go to solitude and practice silent meditation. They don't have any necessary interest in others, but I am not interested in liberating or getting liberated alone like that. So Prahalad here, out of his great compassion, says, while there are many great sages who go into solitude, who therefore strive and attain only liberation for themselves, and they do not care about the world per se, he says, I do not want any liberation for myself, leaving behind all the other miserable creatures. I want only the true liberation for everyone here, because I find no haven of rest other than you for all these people. So Prahalad says, I can get my liberation, but then who is there for all these people. So, this is the compassion of a true devotee, a true lover of the Lord, a true lover of all beings. He says, my heart is aching for all these people who are caught in this ocean of ignorance. So, I don't want to be liberated alone. Please extend it to all these beings. And then Prahlad says, this is so because people are always caught in all these various ways of desires. They are caught in the desire for sex, desire for food, and all kinds of desires, and they never feel satisfied. And even unfortunately, Prahalad says all the so called spiritual activities, he lists all of them, they have become either a show or sometimes means for making money. And this is also true today, even more so. Unfortunately, Prahalad says people keep vows of silence, people do fasting, reading scriptures, practicing asceticism, studying books, and then talking on the scriptures, living in silence, doing prayers. All of this, Prahalad says, in most cases have unfortunately become a way of earning a livelihood, and they are not able to conquer their senses and they are caught in these. So Prahalad says, only you can save them. You are the only source of grace and protection for all living entities. Then Prahalad says, like a seed and a sprout, the unmanifest and the manifest are both your symbols. So it's a very nice metaphor again. The seed is unmanifest, we cannot see the seed. The sprout is manifest. Similarly, Prahalad says the unmanifest pure being, the primordial matter, and the manifest universe are both symbols of you. Therefore, there is nothing other than you, and only those who have completely surrendered unto you can perceive you, because you are everything there is. Then Prahalad lists all the various elements. He says you are air, fire, earth, water, space. You are the five objects of senses. You are the five vital airs: prana, apana, vyana, udana, samana. You are the 10 sense organs of action and perception. You are the mind, the intellect, the ego. He lists everything beautifully. Sarvam tvameva saguno vigunascha bhuman na anyatvadasya api Mano Vachasa Niruktam. He says, everything is you, O Lord. There is nothing here other than you. And whatever is revealed by mind and speech is nothing other than you. And therefore, nobody can know you, not the deities, not the elements, not the mind, intellect, reason, not the various beings, even demigods. Nobody can know you. Therefore, there is no use in studying all the scriptures and all the Vedas, which are full of flowery words, which is very much parallel to what Krishna says in the Gita too, that leave all the flowery words of Vedas and simply surrender unto me. So here also Prahalad says, only through wholehearted service to you, again through the process we saw, Shravan, Kirtana, Smarana, Vandana, Pada Sevana, all of that, that is listening, glorifying, serving the devotees, being compassionate and serving all living entities as the energy of the Supreme Lord, as the representation of the Supreme Lord, and having friendship with all, surrendering to the will of the Lord. In all these ways, only when one surrenders completely can one actually know you, have devotion to you, and gain true wisdom about you. That's how Prahalad concludes his beautiful prayer. And Narada says, when the Lord listened to these prayers, uttered with great reverence by his beloved devotee Prahalada, the Lord became very pleased. His anger had completely gone. As we said, this is all the glorification of Prahalad himself, that his anger did not go till Prahalad came next to him, this young boy who was able to pacify and please and make the Lord very happy, make him go from Ugra, that is the fierce form, to Shanta, the peaceful form. So the Lord became very peaceful. This fierce lion form, he now became smiling, peaceful, and the Lord addressed Prahalad and says, Bhadram Bhadram Te Pritoham. He says, may you be blessed. I am very pleased with you, Prahalad. And then he says, ask any boon you want. Seeing me, getting my darshan is very rare. Darshanam durlabham hime drishtva mam na punarjantur atmanam taptum arhati. He says, getting my darshan, seeing me is so rare, and having seen me, there is no reason to grieve for anyone. Therefore, O Prahlad, all the great enlightened and pious souls who are highly fortunate, they surrender unto me and they are always blessed, and you shall also ask any boon you want. But having said this, when Prahlad was given the opportunity to ask any boon, Prahlad was absolutely not tempted to ask a single boon, and he did not hanker after anything because he was exclusively devoted to the Supreme Lord. So, Prahlad will still address the Supreme Lord and reply to this offer of the Lord to ask any boon. And what Prahlad will reply will continue in the next chapter. For now, we saw in this chapter the most comprehensive prayer, which is also the most comprehensive teaching of Prahlad, full of devotion, wisdom, and compassion. Pure surrender, how to surrender, the ways of surrender, how to win the grace of the Lord, and thereby know Him as the source and the destination of all, and to have compassion for all living entities. So one is not simply interested in one's own liberation, but truly interested in extending this wisdom and grace to all living entities. This is all the example that Prahlad has shown us through these prayers. So again, offering obeisances to the Lord Narasimha and to his beloved devotee Prahlad, we finish this episode. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.